Tanshi. Hello, how are you all? Welcome to Homelands, originally broadcast on CFCR Community Radio, 90.5 FM in Saskatoon, Homelands of the Métis and Treaty 6 Territory, CFCR.ca. This is your favorite auntie, Andrea Letting Dishni Kashun. Call me Auntie Andy if you like, and I'll be your host today. I'm part settler, part relative, and 100% ally to everyone. I'm just me, not a card-carrying member of any Indigenous nation, but I'm loved, adopted by, and related to many, rejected by a few, haters gonna hate, relators gonna relate. I have Indigenous family relations and may secretly love them a little bit more than all the rest, but only because they are the first peoples of this land who've welcomed all the guests. I'm also Irish and Scandinavian with a bit of mystery, and that's the way I was raised, strongly decolonial with a strong sense of justice and a big related heart for all. I mostly relate to my Batosh Métis friends and family and culture, and have continued to try and live that beautiful good life that Mio Pimitiswin. So from the fringes of the sash, I situate myself as relative and ally, and welcome you, my listeners, as brothers, sisters, nieces, nephews, cousins, relatives in the homelands. And today, welcome my relative Jacob Arthur Mooney, who's joining us from out east today. Welcome, Jacob.
Thanks, Andrea. Appreciate it.
Yeah. I'd just like to read Jacob's beautiful land acknowledgement that he sent me from Toronto. This episode's guests are grateful to be able to share stories together on the traditional territory of Tkaronto, where there are trees standing in the water, a gathering place for the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Wendat, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, as well as other nations recorded and unrecorded. This land is governed by the Dish with the One Spoon Wampum Treaty, the dish being Southern Ontario, which we all share and eat out of, which means taking care of the land and all creatures that dwell within it. Please note that this treaty has not been upheld, like all the treaties. In the spirit of reconciliation, the guests this week have made a small donation to their preferred local Indigenous charity, the Native Canadian Centre of Toronto, which is beautiful. And a little bit about Jacob. Uh, his work has been shortlisted for the Dylan Thomas Prize and the Trillium Award in Poetry. He is an MFA graduate from the University of Guelph and lives in Toronto with his partner, the novelist Alexis Von Konigslow, who we will hear from later, and their son Ollie, which he will not be making an appearance to my disappointment. But The Northern is Jacob's fifth book and first novel. So welcome, Jacob. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Andrea. That was very kind. I appreciate you having us.
Yeah. So tell me a bit about this novel. Like it's coming out in May 1st, I believe, is the date.
Yeah, early May. I don't know the exact date, but that sounds about right.
Yeah. And it's about baseball, I understand, which is something I'm excited about.
Yeah, it's a historical novel. It's set in southwestern Ontario predominantly in the early 1950s. And it jumps off from a specific sentence in a book that I read years ago about baseball card collecting called Mint Condition by an American writer named David Jameson from Chicago. Specifically, it was interested in the part of the history where, so baseball cards were a monopoly for decades. It was Topps, which we all know. I have a t-shirt that says Topps on it. People think of baseball cards. I think of Topps, I think, too. Most baseball cards that you're picturing in your head right now, if you're listening along, is probably Topps, especially if you're of a certain age. Um, the monopoly was broken eventually by a Supreme Court ruling, and it was sort of very hard to sort of topple and everything in 1980 and by a company called Fleer, which is another major baseball card company. But in the decades previous to that, there were all these sort of what we call them now startups that tried to break in and break the monopoly in different ways, some with some success, some with limited success. There is a company in Canada called Opeachy, which was one of them and eventually was sold to Topps, but had some success in the 50s too, and it's in the book as well. The one of the ways to try and break it that these small companies got up to is they tried to go into the minor leagues. So for folks who don't know, sort of sports organization, these are kind of rungs of the ladder, so to speak. You start at once upon a time there was D League, C League, B League, A League, and then the major leagues too. So they would start at the very bottom of that ladder and ask kids, really like 18-year-old, 19-year-old kids, hey, when you grow up and become a Major League Baseball player, can we put your face on our baseball cards? And we'll give you some, $5, $2, that sort of thing to do it. Sometimes they just like buy them dinner or something too. That's what the book's about. It's set in that world where there's these two brothers and their baseball coach who moonlights as an agent, and they're from Minnesota, and they're sort of coming into this league called the Northern League, which is what the title of the book comes from, to try and scare up licensees for an eventual baseball card company too. So it's set in that history, but it is not history by any means. Lots of stuff is being made up. The company's fake. The people are fake. O-Pee-Chee is the only real sort of player in the whole thing that you sort of see, just because the book was traveling through London, Ontario in the 50s, so it seemed like we had to have them in there too. Um, but yeah, that's the idea of it. It's a book. It's a coming of age story. It's a road novel. It's a historical novel. It's a labor novel. Sort of working class history and labor class history novel, certainly. It's all those things, and it's not my first time trying to write a novel. It's my first time getting all the way through it and getting it done. But it's been a great experience, and I've loved it all the way through.
Yeah, so your other books were poetry. So tell me about that jump from poetry to novel. I mean, poetry is storytelling. I mean,
Mm.
very condensed. But yeah, they're different beasts in a way. So could you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, I feel like everybody's intimidated by each other in writing. I have lots of novelist friends who say that they're intimidated by poetry, and I have lots of poets friends who are intimidated by writing novels or writing fiction too. I think how the other half of those sort of thing, right? The big difference is that you have to make appointments, I think, to write a novel. Poetry is great for a busy life that buys you like these sort of spare moments here and there to like have something, a nugget that you can maybe extrapolate on later too. And that's how I work. It's not how all poets work by any means. I mean, there's no general answer to any of this, right? This is a massive undertaking done by thousands and thousands and thousands of people all over the world and everything too. So I'm very hesitant to always say like poetry is X, Y, Z, but whatever. With that in mind, for me, it benefits from those sort of nooks and crannies of life, right? You sort of like you do it in the margins and you do it at the edges and everything too, and then it coalesces into this central thing, but only from all these sort of drawn in bits and pieces that you have time for, and you sort of together. I know people who wake up at 5 in the morning every morning and write for 2 hours too. So again, everyone's different, but that's how it is for me. The novel, I think, like I don't get anywhere if I don't have at least an hour, right? Like an hour just to sort of situate where you are coming in. Of course, it's really hard with lifestyle style and family and work and everything else too. But that was a big difference, just trying to sort of make that time and make appointments with yourself, I guess, too, to sit down and do it. Um, Really benefiting, of course, from family balance and Lex, who we'll all hear from later, to sort of helping to sort of, it's not easy having a two-writer family to sort of make time and to make space for that, but um, she- have been extremely lots of luck and generosity in that certainly too. But those are the big differences. I think it's just that you have to sort of sit and type in a way that you don't, one of the weirdest things about the whole thing is like on like a published word count basis, the novel is like 70% of everything I've ever put out into the world now, it seems, which is just an incredible thought. But it is because of just the volume and the sort of scope of a story versus poems too.
I suppose when you do word count, yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
always gives my head a shake to sort of think about it that way, but it's true.
So did you want to talk more about the novel first before we get into a bit of a reading or
Yeah. So the novel, so I will talk about the novel as a way to sort of set up the reading, because I'm not starting on page one, which I know is
Mhm. Yeah.
dangerous. We're sort of
Mhm.
dropping in the middle of it here. So in the novel, the narrating character is a 12-year-old child named Chris. Chris is traveling with two people. He's traveling with his younger brother, whose name is Mikey, who's 7, and their baseball coach, who has a relationship with their mother that they don't fully understand, but essentially they're dating in a casual sort of way. Two, Their father died shortly after the end of World War II. Everyone who's an adult in the story is a World War II veteran. It's very much of a story that's concerned with the broadly unacknowledged traumatic hangover of World War II, especially in terms of how that plays with like kind of the historiography, how we think about the early 50s and that whole area. I think that it's a period of time that history demands a narrative of rebuild from and rebirth from too. And that's certainly true economically anyway, it's true, but um, it was also a period of time just everyone walking around with PTSD of some form too, right? As
Absolutely.
here, certainly in Europe, certainly in Asia
Mm,
too. Um, and the failure to acknowledge that when sort of talking of the cultural history of the period, I think is a real miss. And really the difference between, I think, kind of first gloss nostalgia and history too. Wasn't alive for it. This is sort of all secondhanded information, everything like anything. But that's I think that's valid, and I think that's true. Um, Taking everything from like social history, family history. My mother talks at great length about her father being just an entirely different person, kind of either side, and that was true emotionally, physically, psychologically. He had bits of shrapnel in his brain that they didn't find until he was dying of cancer 50 years later or something, to like, real sort of changes. So I think taking that very seriously and redirecting that sort of rebirth energy in a way I think was is important. Anyway, so the coach is a World War II veteran. The father, the boy's father is strongly suggested, and you know, this is a 12-year-old narrator, so there's a lot of ambiguity about what's actually happening in the adult world throughout the story, but it's strongly suggested that he killed himself shortly after the war, too. Um, Now they're sort of loosely cohabitating with the baseball coach, who's also the mother's boyfriend. Anyway, they cross the border from via Michigan into Windsor, and the book starts on the Ambassador Bridge into Windsor, which is the first host city of a franchise in this fictional kind of straddling Lake Erie league called the Northern League. Um, Windsor is based on a couple of real teams that they've had in different leagues. They've had teams throughout different sort of short-term minor leagues that are sort of folded in here. We meet the team, many members of whom will be very important characters throughout the story as they sort of travel to all the other cities in this league as it goes, and they meet the general manager too, who we'll see a couple more times throughout the story. But this is fairly early. I'm reading from page 44 to be very precise about it here, and I'll pick up from there, sort of describing um, where we are, and I might skip ahead a bit and do a couple more pages thereafter too. I'll keep an eye on time as we go. Okay. Okay. You would need to get very close to Windsor Stadium to know it was home to a professional baseball team. There are no signs on the lampposts, no reference in the city papers. The Clippers languish somewhere in the bottommost third of Windsor's sports attention. There was a junior hockey team and a whole university's catalog of athletic options. The assembly plant for Chrysler was churning out Dodge Kingsways, which were big, dramatic coupes that looked like upper-class gentlemen with mustaches. The men who worked the plant came from farms all over the area and as far away as Nova Scotia. They brought their own interests, hockey and football mostly. The Clippers had been in the Northern League for a decade and never won more games in a season that they had lost. The Tigers and the Red Wings beckoned from the American side of the bridge. The street grid near us had a patchwork quality, giving way from city rigor and right angles to sudden lapses into rural character. A new two-story retail building fronted on an empty meadow. A gas bar overlooked an orchard. The drive to the stadium was like flipping back and forth through time. Like everything else about the Clippers club, the rented stadium was a poor fit for baseball. Winter Stadium was mostly a football park, and the field had a Canadian football layout with a big C in the middle, which Mikey said stood for Canada, but which actually stood for center. Hash marks were visible crawling up the third baseline, ending in an end zone that peeked out from under the temporary fencing the staff erected every time the Clippers' turn to use a field came up. There was no native dirt anywhere. The best they had done was drag a few wheelbarrows worth of ground in from elsewhere to assemble rough sliding pits that, because the football team didn't want trenches in their field, rose up from the rest of the infield like miniature pitching mounds. Our local park back home, before the field went in, there had been a copse of spruce trees. Local men had dug out the stumps but left small hills behind in doing so, and this led to some unexpected bounces when ground balls found certain slopes. I'd gotten used to it, but didn't expect it to be a reusable skill for actual professional baseball, which coach assured me Windsor was. All the seats in the park faced the sea. When set up for baseball, the sea was in shallow center field. This meant that twisting to watch the batter's box all day demanded a sacrifice from your neck muscles that the team's performance did not make consistently worthwhile. There was a grandstand along third base, another wrapped around home plate from dugout to dugout, and that was it. The first base slide was open grass until you hit some forest 50 yards away. The league had asked the Clippers to draw a chalk line indicating where foul territory ended, lest some ambitious outfielder be lost chasing a pop foul that carried all the way into the woods. It was a cold place to start a baseball career, and the 15 Clippers were eager to see the back of it, either by playing their way to affiliated contract or turning heel for college or Korea. Even this hasty approximation of a ballpark required a winter's worth of compromise. The Clippers were set to be folded until 2 weeks before the season, despite a full roster and a modest clutch of season's tickets, because the stadium owners had put their foot down over kicked up sod and other damages from converting the facility all summer. The Northern League's strained schedule for 1952 was caused by shuffling them back in at the last minute. This made coaches' job harder, as instead of sticking in one place for the usual week at a time, the teams moved on after 2 or 3 games, meaning we had fewer chances to meet with the players unless we wanted to chase them all around Lake Erie. The three of us were getting a tour of the situation from Eugene Simonet, a small balding man who I would have guessed was 50 if Coach hadn't spent the drive from Minnesota using him as a dire warning against hard living. So perhaps he was really only 40. He was wearing a light gray suit and a straw boater hat, which was the exact uniform made famous among baseball men by Connie Mack, but the suit's color had bleached from wear, so Mr. Simonet instead gave off the impression of a grown man wearing a child's sailor suit. He pressed his knuckles into the flesh above his hips, the elbows wide and slightly forward, as he accounted for his team. With us was Mrs. Simonet, whose first name was Dora, and who was either around 50 like Jean or aged by his hard living just as much as he was. She sat while we stood, her hands folded in her lap and her legs crossed regally. She had a blue blouse that said Clippers in cursive over the breast. We're sitting up high in the long beach bleachers above third base, cooling off from exercise. Coach had invited Mikey for a quick fielding drill before any of the players were around. He didn't invite me, but in fairness, I didn't ask, and I wanted to be careful not to rip my good shirt, which Mama had bought last summer, which was tight around the chest and arms. We did well scouting the colleges down south this year, found our middle infield. It's a thing to have university men on a team that ends some maturity, but after them, it's all high schoolers, I'm afraid. If you were good enough to make a local paper sports page, but not lucky enough to sign with the D League, we probably called you. I have a stack of newspapers in my office tall enough to follow a horse. Anyone stand out? Coach asked a minute. Pitching's a bit of a mess. We don't hit for power well. But there's a kid from Ohio named Law is a good find. He'll end up playing pony ball down in Texas, if not this season, the next year. Jamestown's already in my ear about him. A good talker too. Some days a little too good, if you understand. Our captain's a fine fellow and a decent ball player, but he doesn't read more than a little. He's not keen to talk to suits, so Law will be the guy you go through for licensing. Coach moved his mouth around like he was chewing on something. Yeah, this Law, is he honest? Mr. Simonet smiled. Like a tidal wave is wet, he is. We stood looking around a little longer, watching some clippers shag fly balls and listening to the groundskeeper shout orders to the crew assembling the fence. Eventually, Coach made a move that he was going to get his coat. The facilities are charming, Gene, he said. They do for now because they have to, said Simonet. City is supposed to pitch in for a proper baseball stadium, but until then, I'm afraid we're like the circus, setting up before the show and striking down after. Till then, we'll be the prettiest operation you'll see this summer. When Coach first met Gene Simonet, he was working as a team secretary for a Toledo club that played in the American Association in front of 10,000 people a night. Coach said he once took him to a prayer meeting with a couple of players and the Toledo equipment manager after Gene had slept the night bare naked in the visitors' dugout. The meetings couldn't hold him, and things kept slipping until he got caught by the wrong authority figure and fired. Dora is helping us out a lot this year, Gene said without prompting. She's been a real champion in that ticket booth. Dora didn't look back at us or acknowledge the compliment, just kept watching the players warm up. It's a good operation, Gene, said Coach, setting his jaw firm and nodding while he gathered his hat. Where are the locker rooms? Gene kept staring out the field and didn't answer right away. When he did, it was just by pointing to two portable buildings on the other side of the fence. They looked like big sheds or small storehouses. Afraid those are them for now. We finished the tour, and Gene had the kid popping popcorn, fix a free bag for Mikey and me. Then we walked down the third base line to the locker room where we'd seen a couple young men in Clippers white and blue enter. As we got closer to the home clubhouse, we noticed a faded sign atop this open doorway. It read Essex County Farm Supplies. Just because the Clippers are a farm team? Mikey asked. No, I said. I reckon they just borrowing the place from a feed store. The building was made of some kind of thin metal and was open on both sides like an airplane hangar. The echo inside was such that once you cleared the doorway, every conversation descended upon you all at once as a reverberating growl. There were curtains hung here and there to organize the space. Pieces of equipment were piled in each corner next to the sign spelling out names and numbers. An old wooden barrel on which someone had written clean shoes stood empty at the back. Squares of daylight, big like automobiles, patched the ground, which was all grass except where it was mud and someone had thrown an unfolded cardboard box over top. I looked up to see bits of ceiling were missing, showing clear to the bright blue midsummer sky. Poor kids, mumbled Coach. They'll be in for some state for a chat, I bet. It wasn't until Coach expressed sympathy for the ball players that I realized I felt the same. The faces around us were young and sullen and looked more than a little underfed. The Clipper's shifting eyes found our bags of popcorn like a flock of gulls waiting for food to be dropped. In every classroom in America, there were boys holding the singular dream of being a professional ball player, that great unlikely jackpot of body and brain that would give you the ticket out of adulthood. Ball players were a universal subject of envy. Every adult path was arduous or dangerous or sad. Other boys grew up to hold jobs they suffered through, or they went to war and died, or came back and died, or they came back to run sporting goods stores and coach baseball, give the remnant knowledge of their dreams to the hungry attention of the next boys who were still keen enough to nurture theirs. But ball players were endless boys. They went off to New York City to play for thousands and meet the mayor. They slept with movie stars and let the world use their faces as avatars of hope on chewing gum wrappers, on pajama tops, and of course, cards. But here are these boys in the squalor of their dreams. They've been pulled out of their lives by the gift of immaculate single sight and left here in an empty foreign football stadium. The Clippers slugged along in the summer heat with not even a working showerhead among them. I found myself shocked to feel sad on their behalf, to want to rescue them and their talents and take them anywhere. New York or Cleveland, sure, but even Minneapolis or Jamestown, or home to the suffering of jobs, just anywhere, to adulthood even.
Wow. Wow.
It was a bit longer than I planned on, but in fairness for myself, that was my first time reading that section.
Oh, nice. Ah, I really enjoyed that. I was right there in the in that little, you know, makeshift you know, with all those young men. That was a really beautiful excerpt. And the
Thank you.
poetry shines through. I love the the description of the car as a mustached man and that kind of thing, but it's a novel. It's compelling. I think it's compared to Catcher in the Rye, no? Did somebody make that comparison or
Yeah, maybe I saw that somewhere. Yeah,
mm,
I think so.
is it
It's
coming of age? Yeah.
yeah, I mean coming of age stories all sort of follow each other, I think, too, right? We always sort of see and the main character is acerbic in the way that I think boys of that age sometimes can be
Yeah.
too. So there's probably something there.
Yeah. Oh, so how long did it take you to write the whole novel from first draft to sending it off for final?
Yeah, well, from first draft, not that long.
Oh,
What I've learned in my various failed attempts to write a novel before this one is that they say that there's two. You're either a plotter or an explorer.
yeah,
Either you need to sort of storyboard the whole thing out and then do what you told yourself to do, or
yeah,
you off you go into the woods with, a map and figure it out.
yeah,
I'm the first kind,
yeah,
or so far, I'm the
yeah,
first kind.
yeah,
Maybe practice and experience and confidence and everything, I can be the other kind too, because I think actually the other kind is a lot more fun, I suspect, too.
right.
But no, I needed a really thorough, solid 20-page map, I think. Character history, background, what happens when, narrative, the whole thing, kind of. Many details of which didn't make it in by name into the book, but I think are there in the same way that, when an actor appears on stage, they have all these things about the character in their head that don't actually show up in the text or something, too,
Yeah,
right? So because of that, it was faster. I think, I could sat down and really sort of plow through that first draft, which I think I only started then in end of end of 2022,
Okay.
maybe. So not that long,
Yeah.
really, all things considered. But like, I mean, I had read this David Jameson's book in 2012, and that notes document and that sort of became that map. I mean, that probably started 10 years ago,
Yes.
easily. Yeah.
So we've kind of been cogitating about it for,
Yeah, and I think that's probably my st structure. Like even now, I have ideas. I have the sort of open, I have that open notes document for like three or four different things, and one of them will probably coalesce into a plan, and then that will coalesce into a draft maybe one day. But I think the real time spend and the percolation is the creation of the sort of map document too, which I think that takes a long time. Right?
yeah. Ah, interesting, interesting process. I love talking about process with writers because everybody's so unique, you know?
Hmm.
Like there's some common things, but everybody kind of has their own technique that works for them. What do you think will be next after this?
It'll probably be fiction. I'm not really writing poems right now. Uh, the things can change fast, certainly. It'll probably be fiction. It'll probably be one of these three or four sort of ideas that are sort of bouncing around here. I think that some of them are more politically immediate and carry with it this need to sort of push it out into the world because it's of the moment. And some of them maybe feel a bit more universal, and
Yeah,
maybe they can take their time a bit. But I also don't really feel deeply in charge of any of this either. Too, I think that the one that coalesces, I think, first and has those sort of breakthroughs that allow me to sort of figure out, okay, how do I go from character, which is where it starts, obviously, and to situation to plot in a speedy time. And sometimes I would prefer which one that would kind of be, but I don't actually know which one it'll be, and I don't think it will necessarily. I don't think I can put a lot of pressure on the scale with my hand necessarily on it. This feels mystical in a way that I don't necessarily believe in too about the process, because I think the process is very much, it's labor in the end, but it's also getting to the point where I think I can start drafting is the product of 10 to 25 little breakthroughs that let me sort of put pieces together in a way like when you're doing sort of a jigsaw puzzle or something, you need like those
yeah,
edges to sort of, come around first or something too.
makes sense.
And whichever gets there first is probably the answer to the one that I'm
Gotcha.
says put in the world next too.
Well, our time has flown, so
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
we are actually at our break now. So that
Yes.
concludes the first half hour of our Homelands this Saturday morning, and we'll be right back on CFCR 90.5 FM with the second half, and that is a surprise for you. Jacob will be replaced by someone else. And stay tuned. Don't turn that dial.